Hey there. In this video, we're going to talk about fairy tale myths, or what a fairy tale is not. So let's dive into common misconceptions about fairy tales. Number one, fairy tales are children's stories. Well, while they may have become associated with children's bedtime stories and animated movies, fairy tales have been told around the fire for the entertainment of all ages for hundreds, even thousands of years. In fact, when the Brothers Grimm, a couple of the most famous early collectors and publishers of previously oral folk tales, published their first edition in 1812, it was a book for an adult audience. And true to its source material, it included very dark, violent, and sexual material, including cannibalism, rape, and incest. Yikes. In my fairy tale research for my book, I read one in which an evil stepmother cut off the head of her young stepson and then, afraid of her husband's anger, tied it back on with a red kerchief around his neck and propped him up at the table for the family dinner. Eee. Over the 19th and 20th centuries, the stories were gradually sanitized to make them more appropriate for children, with whom they increasingly became associated. However, fairy tales have been and are still being repackaged and retold for adult audiences, including in adult fairy tale fantasy novels like Hunted with Megan Spooner based on Beauty and the Beast, movies like Black Swan, TV shows like Once Upon a Time, and our family favorite, Grimm, as well as other cultural performances including theater, for example with Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, Broadway musicals like Into the Woods, and ballets like The Nutcracker and Swan Lake. Number two, fairy tales always have happy endings. This is not always the case, as seen in the relatively modern Hans Christian Andersen's telling of The Little Match Girl. And while happy endings have never been uncommon in traditional fairy tales, they were less common in older stories. Number three, fairy tales are just for scaring children into good behavior. Well, while they may sometimes tell cautionary tales, more often they teach positive life lessons and can provide a message of inspiration and empowerment. Although, come to think of it, sometimes their lessons are pretty muddled. For instance, what lesson is a little girl to take from Goldilocks about going into strangers' houses and helping herself to their porridge? And while I'm on the subject, some people tend to object to traditional fairy tales being too frightening for children. And while that may be true for some children and some stories, an argument can also be made that children don't need fairy tales to tell them that the world is a scary place. They know that already from experience. After all, as a young child, we all lived in a world populated by giants in which we could be physically overpowered at any moment. We didn't understand why we couldn't go where we wanted to go and do what we wanted to do all the time. All we knew was that when an adult said no and meant it, we had no real choice in the matter. Sometimes we couldn't even control ourselves. And especially when we were tired or hungry, we could dissolve into a screaming, crying fit that may have felt like being possessed by an alien force. So we already knew that there was scary stuff in the world. But fairy tales also provided the narrative for how the unlikely hero could, through courage and ingenuity, triumph over the monster. Number four, fairy tales are simply for entertainment. Well, while they certainly are entertaining, they have lasted for hundreds of years because they resonate with people on a deeper level. More about this in our next video. So, stay tuned for our next short video about the benefits of fairy tales for personal narratives. See you soon.